You know the type. The brilliant, charismatic leader who gets incredible results, but leaves a trail of frustrated, stressed out, and just plain burned out people in their wake. They can be visionary one minute and volatile the next, super confident, but also kinda condescending. So how do these people not only survive in organizations, but actually thrive and climb right to the very top? It's a question you've probably asked yourself, right? You see the success, you see the promotions and the praise. But behind the scenes, working for them is, well, it's a nightmare. It feels like a total paradox. And today, we're going to unpack that exact paradox. Well, the answer, according to a ton of psychological research, points to this really fascinating and honestly kind of unsettling concept, the dark triad. Now, this isn't some official diagnosis you'd find in a medical book. It's more of a label for a specific cocktail of three socially difficult personality traits that really help explain this double-edged sword of leadership. To make this a little more real, let's see if any of these statements ring a bell. These are actually pulled from psychological tests. Have you ever worked with someone who's always saying, "I have a take-charge personality"? Or maybe they don't say it, but they definitely act with an attitude of, "I expect to be treated better than average." And what about the really ruthless one? If I have to take advantage of somebody to get what I want, so be it. If any of that sounds even vaguely familiar, then you already get the kind of personality we're diving into here. All right, so what exactly is in this trio of traits? Let's get properly introduced and break down the three distinct but often overlapping personalities that make up the dark triad. So first up in our trio, you've got narcissism. This is all about that feeling of grandiosity and entitlement. In the office, this is your classic self-promoter, the person who just craves constant recognition. Next, there's Machiavellianism. This one is rooted in strategic manipulation. This leader is a cynic, a tactician who sees people as pawns on a chessboard to get what they want. And finally, we have subclinical psychopathy. This one's the most troubling of the three, defined by callousness, a real lack of empathy, and while they all share that manipulative core, they are definitely different flavors of toxic. Okay, so this brings us back to the real head-scratcher. If these traits are so, well, dark, why do these people so often end up as leaders? Why do we keep promoting them? Well, the uncomfortable truth is that these dark traits actually have a bright side, at least in the short term. Their confidence can come off as super charismatic, especially in a crisis when everyone's looking for a steady hand. They are absolute masters of self-promotion and playing the political game at work. Their willingness to take big risks, sometimes that actually leads to real innovation. And maybe the biggest reason, research shows their sheer dominance is often just mistaken for competence. They look like our idea of a leader, so they get the job. And this quote from the consulting firm Egon Zehnder really hits the nail on the head. It's not so black and white. You can imagine a company in a total tailspin. A leader who's willing to be ruthless might be seen as exactly what's needed. The real question is, at what cost? And that brings us to the long-term damage. Right, but that shiny bright side, well, it always comes at a price. Once the emergency is over and that initial charm starts to fade, a very different reality sets in. So what really happens when these leaders stick around for the long haul? The long-term data paints a pretty bleak picture. Internally, these leaders create a climate of fear that just shuts down communication and torpedoes good decision-making. That toxicity leads to more bullying and, no surprise, a revolving door of employees. Ethically, their self-serving nature is even linked to things like cooking the books. And the bottom line. Despite any short-term wins, the research is clear. Over time, these leaders are linked to lower, not higher company performance. So we know what damage they cause, but how? How does it actually happen? It's not always a direct attack. A really fascinating study on nurses and their supervisors actually gives us a super clear picture of the indirect path of destruction they leave. Researchers built this model to map out exactly how dark triad leaders affect their teams. Now, don't worry about trying to read every little box here. The key takeaway is that the damage isn't always direct. Instead, what this study proved is that these leaders sink performance by destroying two absolutely critical foundations of any healthy workplace. The very first thing they erode is something called psychological safety. Think about it this way. It's that feeling in your gut that tells you it's okay to take a risk. It means you can voice a crazy idea, ask a dumb question, or even admit you made a mistake without fearing you'll be humiliated or punished for it. It is absolutely essential for any team that wants to learn and perform at a high level. The second foundation they just completely degrade is what's called an enriched work design. It sounds a little academic, but it's basically everything that makes a job feel good and worthwhile. It's having the autonomy to make your own decisions, getting support from your coworkers, having a variety of tasks so you're not bored, and getting real, meaningful feedback so you can actually grow. So when you put it all together, you get this clear three-step pathway of damage. First, the dark triad leader creates that toxic environment of mistrust and manipulation. Second, this directly eats away at the team's psychological safety and their sense of having a meaningful job. And third, once those two pillars of a healthy workplace start to crumble, team performance and everybody's well-being just inevitably go down the drain. It's like a slow corrosion from the inside out. So, after looking at both sides of the coin, the tempting bright side and the really damaging dark side, what's the final verdict on these leaders?
It really is a story of short-term gains versus long-term pain. That decisive action you loved in the crisis, that turns into poor team decisions day to day. The charisma and vision that drew you in, it curdles into a culture of fear and mistrust. The innovation from all that risk-taking gets totally canceled out by the costs of replacing everyone who quits. And that initial appearance of competence, it's eventually exposed by lower overall performance.
And that is the ultimate takeaway here. While certain traits can absolutely shoot these individuals into leadership roles and even create some moments of success, the core of who they are, their selfishness, their manipulative character, it almost always leads to deeply damaging effects for their teams and their companies in the long run. And that leaves us with one final, really critical question to think about. In our companies, in our culture, when we choose our leaders mainly for their boldness, for their charisma, for that take charge attitude, what are the other crucial qualities, things like humility, empathy, and psychological safety that we're leaving behind?